Hello, adventurers of all shapes and sizes! My name is Chance, welcome to my guide, and thank you so much for tuning into another episode of the Pathfinder 2E Introduction Series. Today we're looking at key terms. It's not super exciting, granted, but it is something we have to do, because moving forward we're gonna be getting into a little bit more complicated stuff, and I'd really have everyone, especially the new players, have at least a foundational understanding of a lot of these words I'm gonna be using. Some of them are pretty self explanatory, some of them we've talked about loosely before, and others we will have full videos dedicated to in the future, so you'll win some, you'll lose some. We're just gonna go in alphabetical order because that's the way the book has it laid out, and in all honesty, I thought of a ton of different ways of grouping these together where it makes sense, but then I ran into the issue of not being able to fit them on the same page, and it was just turning into a pretty big headache. So let's dive right in and get started. So the first thing we're going to be talking about is ability score. Each creature has 6 ability scores, namely Strength, Dexterity, Constitution, Intelligence, Wisdom, and Charisma. These scores represent a creature's raw potential and basic attributes. The higher the score, the greater the creature's ability potential in that ability. Now, this is a subject that we're going to actually have a series of videos on, so bear that in mind. All you need to know that ability scores directly impact how good you are at certain things. Make sense? Sweet. Talking about alignment now, alignment represents a creature's fundamental moral and ethical attitude. Pretty cool. Something I do want to point out, virtually every role-playing game has alignment in one form or fashion. Boiled down, it's whether or not you're good or bad or just kind of somewhere in the middle. Once again, this is another thing we're going to have an entire video dedicated towards, so just be aware that it's a thing. Ancestry is something we've actually talked about before. Ancestry is the broad family of people that your character belongs to, or that a character belongs to. That's just your race, right? Ancestry determines a character's starting hit points, language, senses, and speed, and it grants access to ancestry feats, which we will definitely be covering in a ton of future videos, so don't stress out too much about those as of yet. Now let's check out some more! Looking at armor class, this isn't something we've covered yet, at least in this form, but I'll talk about that in a little bit. All creatures in the game have an armor class. This score represents how hard it is to hit and damage a creature. It serves as the difficulty class for hitting a creature with an attack. Difficulty class, or DC as we've covered it in previous videos, is something we've already discussed. We will be readdressing it in this video just because it is one of those terms, and I'd like this to kind of serve as a standalone kind of thing if at all possible. Now, a cool thing about armor class is, now this is for you game masters out there, don't always describe it as a block. That's something that gets boring after a while. You mix it up a little bit. Say stuff like, the battle axe barely grazes you, but you remain unharmed. Stuff like that. Make it more descriptive. But that's just a pro tip for you. Another term is attack. When a creature tries to harm another creature, it makes a strike or uses some other attack action. Pretty standard stuff. Background is another thing that we're going to have a whole series of videos dedicated towards, but a background represents what a character experienced before they took up the life of an adventurer. Each background grants a feat and training in one or more skills, so there's a ton of them. We will be covering all of them. No need to stress. It's, I don't know, I really think that 2E Pathfinder did a really good job with them, so I'm really looking forward to covering them with you guys. Now let's move on. Now we got some more complicated ones coming up here. Firstly, bonuses and penalties. This is one we've kind of addressed in previous videos, but haven't really delved into. And there's a good reason for that, and that's because, once again, we're going to be covering it in entire videos. But in terms of what you need to know, bonuses and penalties apply to checks and certain statistics. There are several types of bonuses and penalties. If you have more than one bonus of the same type, you only use the highest bonus. Likewise, you only use the worst penalty of each type, which is pretty cool. I like that. It makes the game make a ton more sense, so just bear that in mind and you should be fine, at least until we really get into them. Now, class is something that all of you are without a doubt aware of currently, especially if you've played any form of RPG. A class represents the adventuring profession chosen by a character. A character's class determines most of their proficiencies, grants the character hit points each time they gain a new level, and gives access to a set of class feats. Pretty cool stuff. Honestly, most of you already know that, so I'm not going to spend too much time on it. It's going to be covered in a ton of videos. Now let's move on. Looking at condition now. A condition is an ongoing effect that changes how a character can act or that alters some of their statistics. Now, Pathfinder 2e has a ton of different conditions, and they all make logical sense if you think them through, but once again, covering them in future videos, don't need to worry about it. Just need to know that there's conditions out there and that they can affect your character in a variety of ways. The next point is currency, and I'm assuming that literally everyone on the planet should be aware of what a currency is, but you might not be aware of the exact exchange rates. So, the most common currencies in the game are gold pieces, or GP, and silver pieces, or SP. 1 GP is worth 10 XP, so a 1 to 10 conversion, and 1 SP is worth 10 CP, or copper piece, so 1 to 10 conversion. And 10 gold pieces are worth 1 platinum, so, or PP, so it goes platinum, gold, silver, copper, much like most meddling, right? So, pretty easy. It's all 1 to 10 conversion, so pretty easy to bear in mind. And once again, most people would already assume that, but, you know, for the newer players, makes sense. Now let's move on. So, when you're talking about a feat is an ability you can select for your character due to their ancestry, background, class, general training, or skill training. There's a ton of them, and I'm so excited to actually dive into them. They're my favorite part of Pathfinder 2e, and I know a lot of you are going to feel the same way, so I'm kind of got a little bit of an itchy trigger finger with them right now. Next point is Game Master or GM. We've definitely talked about this a lot. The Game Master is the player who adjudicates the rules and narrates the various elements of the Pathfinder story and world that the other players explore. Basically, they're a pseudo-deity in at least a couple senses of the word, but that's all you need to know about them. Just a different way to play the game, right? And then there's Galarian, and that is the planet that Pathfinder is set on. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Galarian. I don't know. Sounds pretty cool. If I got it wrong, I apologize. Put it down beneath in the chat how you pronounce it. And it is considered to be the lost age of omens currently. So, to a little bit of context, that's not really a hard and fast rule. You can play it a little bit soft and loose, so don't worry about it. But, I mean, historical context does matter sometimes, so I don't know, up to the Game Master. Players don't really need to worry about that stuff. Now let's move on. So hit points, or HP, once again, pretty popular term in most role-playing games. Hit points represent the amount of punishment a creature can take before it falls unconscious and begins dying. Initiative, which is something we've touched on before. At the start of an encounter, all creatures involved roll for initiative to determine the order in which they act. The higher the result of its roll, the earlier a creature gets to act. Typically, it's based off of your perception, but that's not always the case, and that's something that I really like about Pathfinder 2e. We'll get into that in a much later video when we really dive into combat, though, but it's really cool stuff. And the third term on this sheet is level. A level is a number that measures something's overall power. Now, virtually everything in Pathfinder has a level assigned to it, from PCs or players to monsters to spells. There's levels all over the place, and different level ranges can mean different things, but we'll address those as they come up, just to keep it fresh in everyone's head and so it can be a standalone video. So don't worry about it. All you need to know is higher the level, more powerful it is. Cool? Cool. Well, let's move on. Non-player characters, or NPCs. A non-player character controlled by the GM interacts with players and helps advance the story. Now, this is not always the case. You can have NPCs that are controlled by players. It's not very common, but it has been known to happen in quite a few games, especially at those higher levels. So, but in general, typically controlled by the Game Master. Perception. Perception measures your character's ability to notice hidden objects or unusual situations, and it usually determines how quickly the character springs into combat, which is, of course, leads into initiative, right? Cool? Cool. The next point, player characters, or PCs. You definitely know what these are. This is a character created and controlled by a player. Makes sense? And yeah. Now let's get into a complicated one. Proficiency. Now, this is not super complicated if you've played 5e, for example, but it is a little weird in Pathfinder, so it makes sense once you get used to it, but it is a little weird at first. Proficiency is a system that measures a character's aptitude at a specific task or quality. And it has 5 ranks: untrained being the first, trained, expert, master, and legendary being the last. Proficiencies give you a bonus that is added when determining the following modifiers and statistics: AC, attack rolls, perception, saving throw skills, and the effectiveness of spells. If you're untrained, your proficiency bonus is +0. If you're trained, expert, master, or legendary, your proficiency bonus equals your level +2, 4, 6, or 8 respectively. It's pretty cool. It's a neat system. I really like what Pathfinder did with it. The 5e version, in case you're curious, is just literally tied to your level, but it doesn't equal your level. It's a little strange, but I really prefer the 2e system over the 5e. Just saying, my personal opinion, but whatever. Now let's move on. We're talking about Rarity now. Now, this is something I thought was absolutely genius, but we'll get into it. Some elements of the game have a rarity to denote how often they're encountered in the game world. If no rarity appears in the traits of an item, spell, or other game element, it is of common rarity. Uncommon items are available only to those who have special training, grew up in a certain culture, or come from a particular part of the world. Rare items are almost impossible to find and are usually given out only by the GM, while unique ones are literally one of a kind in the game. Now, almost every role-playing game follows this system in one form or fashion, but something that I am so happy about in terms of what Pathfinder 2e did is they made it so certain training is required for certain items above common. What I like about this is it makes logical sense. In 5e, it's true, there are prerequisites sometimes, and attunement's a thing, so that helps, but I think this makes much more sense in a real world context. I like it, I think it plays really well, and I think players appreciate it. It does make things a little bit more difficult, though, in the way that the Game Master has to be aware of everyone's build when they're giving out magical items, just to make sure everyone else is fairly balanced relative to one another. Pretty cool, I like it, interesting mechanic. But let's move on. The next point we're going to talk about is role-playing. Describing a character's actions, often while acting from the perspective of the character, is called role-playing. When a player speaks or describes actions from the perspective of a character, they are, quote, in character, end quote. Roleplay is an incredibly important aspect of all these TTRPGs, but more so in the more fantasy ones. And certainly in Pathfinder and other variations of D&D, because exploration is a huge part of the game. And pro tip, most game masters reward active role playing. You don't have to be great at it, you don't have to do the special voices, but if you think like your character and act as though they would act, it really does bring a certain life to the game, and it's a different kind of fun, even if it's counterintuitive and suboptimal. If anything, I think that's more fun, but let's move on. Looking at a round is a period of time during an encounter in which participants get a chance to act. A round represents approximately 6 seconds in game time. We've talked about rounds before. They're only relevant when you're in combat. Basically, in a round, everyone takes a turn, and after that happens, a new round begins, and that continues until combat ends. Saving throw, or a save, as almost everyone calls it. When a creature is subject to a dangerous effect that must be avoided, it attempts a saving throw to mitigate the effect. It doesn't mean the effect gets completely nullified all the time, but it might lead to reduced damage or something else. But it's just a term to be aware of, so it'll ask for a certain kind of save, and then you'll roll your d20, add whatever modifier based on whatever type of a save it is, and then based on the result versus the DC, something will happen or something won't happen. Cool? Cool. Next point. A skill. So a skill represents a creature's ability to perform certain tasks that require instruction or practice. Pretty cool stuff. That kind of feeds into what we were talking about in relation to proficiencies. So pretty cool stuff. Looking at speed. Speed is the distance a character can move using a single action measured in feet. Makes sense. Spells are magical effects created by performing mystical incantations and gestures known only to those with special training or inborn abilities. Pretty cool stuff. Spells are a huge part of the fantasy genre, of course, and Pathfinder has quite a few of them for this just being the core rulebook. I'm really excited to see what other spells they come up with, but it looks really good so far, and I'm, of course, excited to delve into them later on. Now, the final page here, trait. A trait is a keyword that conveys additional information about a rule, elements such as School of Magic or Rarity. Often, a trait indicates how other rules interact with an ability, creature, item, or other rule element that has a trait. Cool. So, traits kind of are just like a catch-all term. We'll be breaking down how to read certain blocks in the next couple videos here, and that's where I'll delve into traits a lot more, just so everyone's on the same page when it comes to them. But it's how you read, like, monster stat blocks, for example, or even item stat blocks or spell stat blocks. Like, the traits just mean every item listed on there. It's kind of complicated to explain right now, but I promise I'll do a future video on it and break all of it down for you. And then the last point is turn. During the course of a round, each creature takes a single turn according to initiative. A creature can typically use up to 3 actions during its turn. Pretty cool stuff. Once again, we've kind of mentioned that earlier when we went over round, and of course we mentioned it when we did a very quick summary of combat in the previous video. So those are all the key terms you need to know starting out. We will build on all of these as the videos progress and as complexity builds. So don't worry too much if you don't have all of them committed to heart. You can always come back to this video and review if you have any questions or a little bit fuzzy on anything. But for the most part, I think you'll be okay. If you have any questions, though, please put it down beneath in the comment section. I'll be more than happy to talk you through it. And that being said, I hope you guys all have a great day. Thank you so much for listening until the end. I know this was probably our driest episode, but I really do appreciate it. That being said, happy adventuring, everyone, and I hope you all have a great day.